Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. It is always my pleasure to welcome you to our MI Colloquium. This is our first of this semester, and it's my pleasure to again have our guest speaker, Assistant Professor Shagun Jhaver. So let me tell you a little bit about what's going on. We're going to be talking about how online platforms govern user activities and why that matters. Meeting info, again, there will be a video available in about a week on the MI Colloquial playlist. So again, you guys don't need that. You'll be here to hear that. But again, if you know people or you want to see our other MI colloquiums that we've done over the past, there's a really nice archive there. Please do stay muted throughout the presentation. You can put Q&A in the chat at any point, and we'll do that. And of course, there will be a Q&A session. We do like a lively chat environment, so I'll be monitoring that while Shagun is giving his presentation and do as much as we can with that. So here's our agenda. We're right now doing the welcome. We're going to have Shagun give about 45 minutes of his presentation, then we'll do our Q&A, and then we'll have a few closing comments, and then send you on your way on this, again, leap year day. So let me introduce you to our guest speaker, again, Shagun Jhaver. Shagun's work lies at the intersection of social computing, human-computer interaction, and data science, which makes him really unique and very special as far as those interdisciplinary foundations. So again, his research builds on the foundation for designing fair and efficient content moderation systems on digital platforms, as we were talking right before we started, something that's in front of the Supreme Court right now. Before joining Rutgers, he was at a postdoc research at the University of Washington and an affiliate at the Berkman Klein Center for the Internet and Society at Harvard. Shagun has a PhD from Georgia Institute of Tech, a master's in computer science from the University of Texas in Dallas, and a bachelor's in technical and electrical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay. And he is part of the Computational Social Science Lab and the Social Media and Society clusters at Sky. And with that, I will give it over to Shagun.
Thanks, Connie. One second, let me try to share this. Okay, can you all see this?
We can.
Okay, I'll get started
Perfect.
then. Okay, so hi everyone, good to see you all, and thanks for coming to this presentation. So today I'm going to talk about decentralizing platform power, and I'm going to present a design space of multi-level governance in online social platforms. And that's a bit technical, so I will slowly relax you and kind of like explain the space that I'm working in with before I get into the nitty-gritties of this specific project. So I want to caution that some of the slides and this talk contain offensive language and images. So please bear with me on that. But that content was important to include to describe some of the specifics of this research. So I'll start with a thought exercise. Let's suppose that you create a new social media website of your own. What type of comments will you allow on this site? If someone posts this comment, will you allow it or remove it? How about this comment? What if someone posts this? How about this? It turns out that making decisions like these about which posts should be allowed on a platform and which should be removed is a fundamental service that all social media platforms provide. These include platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so on. And this service is part of what we call platform governance. Now, these 4 comments are actually examples from Facebook's internal rulebook for platform governance, which was leaked a few years ago. And according to this rulebook, this comment should be allowed, this removed, this should be allowed, and this removed. Now, this is what Facebook would do, but other platforms may have different criteria of what is appropriate, and they may make different moderation decisions for these same comments. So as a researcher, I'm interested in understanding how platforms go about making these governance decisions and what drives these decisions. And the main goal of my research is to build a foundation for designing transparent and effective platform governance. To give some more background about this, platform governance, or what we colloquially call content moderation, is an organized practice of screening user-generated content posted to internet sites in order to determine its appropriateness for that site. Now, these platform governance are part of complex socio-technical systems made up of platform administrators at the very top. These administrators create a set of community guidelines or platforms terms of services, which shape the decisions that are made. And these guidelines are enacted and implemented on the ground by moderators who can be either paid moderators or volunteer moderators who are selected from among the active community members. And these moderators use a wide variety of automated tools, which we call moderation bots. And at the center of all of this are the end users and regular users like you and me, who are consumers of these platforms' content. And we also, in very crucial ways, shape these governance practices. Now, why should we care about platform governance and content moderation practices? Is because these are one of the key mechanisms that helps users of these platforms find relevant information. So because there's a lot of inappropriate content and irrelevant content, it is vital that platform governance practices remove that content so that we can find the information that is relevant more easily. Platform governance also addresses some of the key problems that the internet faces today, and this includes online harassment, misinformation, spam, and online radicalization. It also shapes who gets heard online and what is the reach of different individuals. Uh, Unfortunately, platform governance is broken. It seems that every day we hear new news articles about how social media platforms have failed in their governance practices. One of the key problems that we hear about is a lack of transparency in platform governance. And also the rise of online hate groups is another major challenge that a lot of these platforms are experiencing. And there's an urgent need to address these failures in platform governance. And my approach to addressing these failures is to first understand the governance needs, perspectives, and practices of end users, because that is important to examine the nuances of online harms that occur on these platforms and finding solutions for how to addressing them. I also try to examine the structural and functional aspects of platform governance. And this includes investigating questions about the labor involved in enacting these governance mechanisms, as well as the role that AI and automated tools play in these governance mechanisms, as well as the constraints under which the moderators of these platforms work. And finally, I study how users behave in response to these governance actions. So I, for instance, examine the utility or the effectiveness of a range of moderation interventions. And by doing that, I contribute towards a broader theory of what type of interventions should be deployed under what circumstances. I use a variety of data collection methods to conduct my research. That includes surveys, online experiments, semi-structured interviews with different varieties of users and moderators, participant observation of online communities, user activity logs taken from social media sites like Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook, literature reviews of what has been conducted in prior research. And I also rely and implement or draw from theories from a wide varieties of disciplines, and that includes social psychology, political science, economics, communication studies, library sciences, and human-computer interaction. So that's kind of like a broad overview of what my research is about. And in today's talk, I'm going to talk about a particular project called Decentralizing Platform Power, which I conducted in collaboration with Seth Frey and Amy Zhang. And this paper was published in Social Media Plus Society. So to begin with, let me tell you about the starting of this project and what motivated this project. So this was a few years ago when Elon Musk had taken over Twitter. And we had noticed that in the aftermath of that, there was an exodus of a lot of users who were leaving Twitter and going to join other social media sites. And people went to a wide variety of different platforms from Twitter. Now, one of the decisions that users faced was, okay, which of these platforms should they move to? And a lot of different factors affected those decisions. But one of the key factors was the governance design. How are the design of these other platforms different from Twitter? And one of the concerns that many users had was, are they going to face the same problems that they faced on Twitter? Uh, when it comes to the governance design, one thing to observe on Twitter is that it is centrally governed, which means that there is a small number of platform administrators at the very top who really determine how different Twitter conversations should be governed, what should be allowed on the platform, and what should be removed. And these small set of platform administrators and the philosophy that they implement actually shapes the content governance decisions of the entire Twitter user base. In contrast, if you look at a platform like Reddit, it is made up of a number of different Reddit communities. And each of these communities has its own set of community guidelines, its own set of moderators, and they govern what happens to the members of that community and their postings. So each Reddit community has its own separate web pages, its separate submission rules, its set of moderators who use their own custom moderation paths and their own governance arrangements, which are specific to that community. Reddit is not unique. We have other decentralized platforms like Mastodon, for example. Each Mastodon node governs the people who are connected to that node, and every node is distinct from every other Mastodon node. So the administration of one Mastodon node does not interfere with or influence, at least directly, the administration of another node. So these are two different paradigms of how to go about enacting governance within an online platform. The centralized architecture of Twitter is very different from the decentralized architectures of platforms like Reddit and Mastodon. And this difference, this key difference, shapes the different approaches that these platforms take to things like privacy, safety, growth, censorship, autonomy, management, and other governance properties. And that was one of the key reasons or factors that would influence anybody leaving Twitter to go to these other platforms. It's also worth noting in this illustration that there are different flavors of decentralized governance. So we talked about these two examples of Reddit and Mastodon, who are both examples of decentralized governance, but they are not really, they have a lot of distinctions between them. For instance, on Reddit, there is a top level made up of Reddit administrators who actually run a pretty tight ship. They can take platform-wide actions. For instance, they can ban entire Reddit communities if they feel that the community is not behaving well. On the other hand, on Mastodon, there is no top level because it's just the top level is made up of this code, which anybody can use to create a new Mastodon node. So there is no overarching overseer who is governing what's happening in this individual Mastodon nodes. So that creates a different type of localized community. So given this context, we ask the following research questions in this work. First, what is the range of variation in how platforms organize multi-level governance systems? And second, what are the implications of this range for the value that users receive from their platforms and the content that they volunteer to contribute? And to answer these questions, we propose this new lens to characterize different flavors of decentralized governance called multi-level governance. It is made up of a top level, which consists of platform administrators, global content moderators, and platform developers. And at the very bottom level, we have end users who are the people who are governed in these platforms. But then there is also a middle level made up of community managers, server administrators, and third-party tool developers. And in this work, we primarily focused on this middle levels of platform governance. These middle levels interact with centers of power and authority that make up the top level of platform governance, but they also closely interact with end users who are sitting at the bottom level of this platform governance architecture. And we especially focus on this middle levels of governance in this research because they are really the main arena for lower level agents to collectively organize with or against each other, and also collectively organize against top level agents. And these middle levels also interact with other kinds of middle levels, which we are going to talk about in the slides later. It turns out that these middle levels are ubiquitous online. For example, Reddit subreddits are a kind of middle level, which I already talked about. They are governed by platform administrators at the top level, and they themselves govern users who are part of the community or the subreddit. We also talked about Mastodon nodes. Other examples include Facebook groups, YouTube channels. For example, if you are a channel creator, you can remove the comments that are posted on your channel, but you yourselves are governed by the YouTube administrators at the top level. Other examples include Twitch channels, Wikipedia language editions, WhatsApp groups, Minecraft servers, and Twitter block lists. So you see there is a wide range of different types of platforms who have this architecture. And the main research contributions that we have in this work are, first, we propose new dimensions for how middle levels can vary in their structure and design. We show how new designs can negotiate between the advantages of centralization versus decentralization toward building more ethical, sustainable, and empowering online platforms. And finally, we offer practical design implications for online communities, drawing on lessons learned from both offline and online institutions. In putting together this work, one of the main inspirations that we drew from was the US federalism model, which actually has a decentralized governance architecture. So this is what the US government looks like. There is a smaller federal government, which actually is in charge of state governments. And then each state government also oversees the governance at the city or county levels. But both the state governments as well as the city and county governments have certain levels of autonomy. And they work more closely with the more localized concerns that they are in charge of. So, like I said, there is an overarching federal government which is responsible for broader governance. But then there are also state governments which exceed their authority to federal government in many cases. But they are also concerned with local issues in their own cities and counties. And the federal government also can govern states as well as the city and county levels. So there's a clear analogy with the online platforms here, and we drew from this analogy. So there's a top level, a middle level, and a bottom level, similar to how the US government has a federal level, state level, and city or county level. And these are the points of analogy. So our approach here was to look at existing literature on decentralized governance in nation states, because this literature is much more mature, it's much more robust. Online platforms have been around for 20, 30 years, but the nation states and these different political governance models have been around for centuries. So the literature on them is much more mature. So we drew from this literature and really analyzed and thought about what we can learn from this larger literature. And we also looked at current practices in online governance. So we looked at examples of online platforms that incorporate decentralization and examine what we can learn from those current practices. And combining these two different aspects, we thought about what we can learn from this, as well as what remains to be explored going further. We primarily drew from theories of offline governance that includes federalism, which I already talked about, but also polycentricity, which is a generalization of federalism. And we also drew from organizational theory. So how do organizations work? Because organizations also has that multi-tier architecture that often shapes their governance. So we also drew from organizational theories. We engaged in an iterative exploratory process where we combined taxonomies from the above literatures with case studies of online governance. And this process was complex and involved interpretation, redefinition, and verification of emerging dimensions. It also involved comparisons of dimensions with one another, as well as examining the relations of dimensions to the above literature. And through this process, we arrived at a theoretical framework of platform of online governance. And this general framework of multi-level design examined or contributed 4 sources of design variation: cross-level, within unit, and system level. And I'm going to talk about each of these sources of design variation. So within level or lateral dimensions include variations in how middle level units interact with one another. So for example, if we take the instance of Reddit as a platform, this would examine the ways in which different subreddits interact with one another. Another example would be how Mastodon nodes can federate with or block other nodes, or how Wikipedia articles link across language additions. For instance, we notice that often Wikipedia articles in non-English languages would have a link to the same article or article about the same topic in the Wikipedia English edition, because English edition articles are often much more comprehensive. And there are many dimensions of interest here. One particularly interesting dimension here is transit costs between different units, which refers to how expensive is it in terms of time, in terms of user effort, to move from one unit to another unit. For example, it's very cheap to move from one subreddit to another subreddit because you can be part of multiple subreddits at the same time. But it's much more expensive to do that in World of Warcraft guilds, because as a user, you can only be part of one guild at a time. Another set of design dimensions that we identified was within unit dimensions, which refers to cross-platform differences in the internal characteristics of middle-level units. What do I mean by that? It essentially talks about how a subreddit is governed in comparison to a Facebook group, for instance. For example, if we talk about transparency as a dimension, within this space of within unit dimensions, then the level of transparency that a subreddit displays as compared to a Facebook group can be quite different, and there can be different ways in which this transparency differs. So for instance, within Reddit communities, you have publicly viewable rules which are visible to everybody by default. That's not the case with Facebook groups. So if you want to learn more about the way that a Facebook group is governed, you'll have to first join it, or at least apply to join that group. And only then you can identify some of the more intricate aspects of the transparency within that group. Another way that platform designs vary in their governance is along the system level dimensions, which are the high level dimensions that influence multi-level architecture. They influence the entire architecture. This could be, for instance, a depth of nesting of middle levels. For example, subreddits are the only formal middle levels between the Reddit administrators and the end users. In contrast, Wikipedia also has wiki projects under different language editions, which can be considered its own form of middle level. So because in each language edition, you have multiple wiki projects, and in each wiki project, you can have multiple Wikipedia articles. So you have this two-level architecture, uh, two middle levels, which are hierarchical among themselves. And finally, we have the cross-level or vertical dimensions, which talk about the variations in how middle-level units can interact with each other. So they interact with how variations in how middle-level units can interact with both platform administrators in the top level as well as end users at the bottom level. And this is the dimensions that we focus on primarily in the rest of our research. So I'm going to talk about the dimensions that we identified in more detail. And these include overlap of jurisdiction, cross-cutting membership, degree of autonomy, degree of authority, and degree of support. I'm going to go through each of them one by one. But before that, I presented this broader space of design variations, just to kind of like demonstrate how the choices that we make in how these dimensions and governance arrangements should be constructed affect different parts of platforms. Drilling down into cross-level dimensions, like I mentioned, the first dimension that we identified was overlap of jurisdiction. This refers to the degree of overlap between the middle level and the top level regarding their areas of responsibility. And this includes asking questions such as, what are each level's governance actions and how much do those overlap? For example, both YouTube platform and YouTube creators can remove inappropriate comments posted on a creator's videos. So that is a responsibility or a power that both the YouTube creators as well as the YouTube platform share with each other. And that's the kind of like overlap of jurisdiction that I'm referring to here. Second dimension that we identified of particular importance was cross-cutting membership. This indicates whether membership in each unit is exclusive, or that is, whether two units can govern the same user. For example, on WhatsApp, users can simultaneously join more than one group at the same time. And if they do that, then they will simultaneously be governed by more than one group's administrators. In contrast, in World of Warcraft, like I mentioned before, you can only be part of one group at a time. Next, we have degree of autonomy from above or below. This examines the extent to which middle-level units can operate independently or have accountability to another level that constrains their autonomy. And we talk about both autonomy from above as well as autonomy from below. For example, WhatsApp prides itself on its encryption, but because of that encryption feature, platform has limited visibility or perhaps no visibility into what's happening in WhatsApp chats. So WhatsApp groups for instance, have a higher autonomy from the WhatsApp administrators as compared to Reddit, for instance. Another example is autonomy from below. So how independent are the Reddit uh, subreddit moderators, for instance, from the users who are part of that subreddit. So there is some level of autonomy. There's quite a lot of autonomy, but still at some level, Reddit users can report abusive moderators to the Reddit administrators, and then those moderators can be held accountable. So that's degree of authority, of autonomy. A related dimension is degree of authority over levels above or below, which is quite related to autonomy from, but it refers to the ability of middle level units to regulate or sanction uh, the other units in other levels. So although it's related to autonomy from, piecing out the direction of this unit's authority distinguishes different instances of multi-level governance. For example, Facebook group administrators have authority over group members. They can sanction the people who are part of the Facebook group if they behave badly. So they have authority over the level below. Authority over higher levels is much rarer. And usually much weaker. For example, there is a Reddit moderator council which can recommend to the Reddit administrators how they should govern the entire platform, but they can only propose recommendations. They do not have any authority to enforce those recommendations. Similarly, we have other instances like Wikipedia, where the users have can actually make recommendations to the Wikipedia top level on how the platform should change, but they cannot enforce that. And finally, another cross-level dimension that we identified was support by levels above or below. This measures how middle levels are supported by higher levels through receiving technical help or getting access to moderation resources. For example, the website Discord launched a moderator academy to educate server moderators on how they should go about conducting governance. Middle levels can also be supported from below, from the end users at the bottom level. And that support can be quantified based on whether a middle level is wholly or partially user run and user funded. For example, private messaging servers are very much reliant on the end users to make sure that the servers are running, because these users actually share the server space with other users. So what does this all mean? Why should we care about this theoretical framework? One reason is that by reading this framework, we can also draw upon lessons learned from offline governance literature, because this theoretical framework was created by taking inspiration from the offline governance. And empirical studies within that literature has some lessons for us on how or what we can expect from different arrangements of online governance. Before I move, I should also point out that the theoretical framework that I have presented here is far from comprehensive. So these are just some of the lessons that we can learn from offline governance literature. This is a pretty preliminary framework, and there's a lot of rich theories that we can draw from to more enrich our understanding of the variations of online governance arrangements.
Let me jump in here just real quick so we're clear. So what you're going to teach us from the design perspective are lessons learned from political science. Is that what?
Yeah, from both
Yeah.
political science as well as from the examples and illustrations that we have drawn from in the space of online governance. So
Excellent.
as a
Okay, great.
researcher, I'm more of an expert on online governance and what happens within those spaces, but I have combined a more limited literature that we have in online governance space with the more classic traditions and theories that we have from the offline governance literature.
Yeah, because I was really wondering, how do you design in these features? How do you design in governance? So that's what we're going to hear. By the way, I was doing a quick little poll in the chat for our audience. We have a lot of library science people, some archives and preservation, one designer. I'm not sure what TIM is, Kenley. I'm sorry, I'm probably not making so perhaps while you're talking, being able to relay that to the library science people in particular, out of my curiosity as well, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll try to do that as well.
Cool.
So a lot of it's about like how information is governed and curated online. So different ways of curating information online can have different effects on the user base. And that is something that librarians and information scientists also care a lot about. So these are kind of like broader design kind of like ideas. So these are not like something specific in terms of user interface choices. But for instance, in the space of when we think about how can we make platform governance structures that enable innovation, adaptation, and healthy competition. So we know that as communities evolve, their survival partly depends on their ability or their willingness to be flexible and to evolve in response to external events and crises. Um, to enable innovation and adaptation, offline governance literature suggests that online social platforms should provide autonomy and support to local administrators' experiments. So an experimentation environment should be available. And these experiments can be done with different types of community guidelines, sanctioning criteria, and automation settings. And this has come from a long history of innovations at the local levels, state levels. So a lot of our policies at the central level, federal levels, are actually bottom up. So people try something at the local level, it becomes successful, it moves from there, spreads across regions, and then is finally adopted at the federal level. For example, high schools. The concept of high schools was actually initiated locally in some smaller regions, and then it spread from there, and now it is adopted at the federal level. Similarly, we can have if we have this environment of open experimentation with different moderation choices, governance choices in the online settings, we will be able to like find more optimal ways of creating governance arrangements which work better. And providing these middle levels more autonomy and support would better foster that environment. Also, competition between different governance units also induces self-regulating tendencies. So competition can be actually very good. If you have a healthy competition, for example, competition between different cities can often encourage those cities to better govern themselves and have low crime rates and so on. Similarly, competition between different governance units can compel units to demonstrate their value to the members who are considering which particular unit to choose. However, competition can be detrimental when it leads to cross-community conflict. So platforms with cross-cutting membership, where users can join more than one governance unit at the same time, as it happens in case of Reddit and WhatsApp, for instance, may be able to avoid excessive competition, as joining one unit does not imply exiting another. So that's one way in which we can foster healthy competition. Another guiding principle of how to improve governance is to facilitate social learning between different governance units. So many platforms, unfortunately, do not offer formal avenues for administrators in different centers to communicate with one another. For example, Reddit administrators or um, subreddit moderators of different subreddits do not really talk to each other. And this can often lead to inefficiencies such as the building of redundant automated moderation tools or paths. So in my own investigations, I have found that often subreddits, different subreddits would have the same need and they would invest in creating the same types of governance mechanisms as well as technical tools like moderation paths. Uh, but this would be just kind of like a duplicate effort because somebody else has already created the same thing. So this knowledge transfer is often lacking between different governance units. And allowing for cross-cutting membership, which permits members to be in multiple communities at the same time, would enable knowledge transfer. People can bring in their experiences from one unit and tell about that to administrators of another unit. And top level can also facilitate social learning. So given some overlap in jurisdiction, the top level would become more invested in what's happening at the middle levels, and they could promote specific middle level solutions to additional uh, middle level units. So for instance, in one of my studies, I had found that one of the tool which is now available to every subreddit called AutoMod, which is an automated moderation mechanism. It actually started out as just a third-party user, a regular Reddit moderator who created this bot on his own to make the governance of his own subreddit easier. And just from this kind of like individual contribution that bot and sharing that bot with other subreddits, that bot became very popular at one point, and Reddit incorporated it into their own governance arrangement at the central level. So that kind of like adoption of middle level solutions at the top at the entire platform level can be very helpful. Next is this idea of how do you go about establishing accountability for these middle levels. So there's surprisingly little evidence of top levels actively evaluating middle level units very granularly. So middle level units, for the most part, are left to their own devices, and the administrators of those units actually are left to do and govern those units however they like. Um, Now, this kind of accountability that we desire can come from levels below. For example, there are processes for users to report the local administrators if they are behaving badly. And a middle level supported from below can be actually very helpful because it can work autonomously from the level above. And it would also be obliged to hold greater accountability to the levels below. For example, if a WhatsApp group administrator is worried that he would be reported to the platform, then they would be more cautious and more responsible in how they go about governing the WhatsApp group. Accountability can also come from above. So, for example, the Facebook as a website can make Facebook groups accountable for how they are governing by paying close attention to their governance and by sanctioning Facebook groups, which are, for example, hosting radicalized activity. So yeah, those are some of the lessons that can be drawn from this research, and I'm happy to take some questions now.
So I have a few questions actually. So, well, thank you. First of all, fascinating. It sounds like it's almost like this whole incredible mishmash of like little walled gardens
Yeah.
with gardeners in charge and no one's, and we're all creating the same. So I was moderator for a Facebook group and did not like it because I didn't like, because there was, again, one person made the group, he was abusive. And so I just stopped doing it. So I wonder how often that happens. But I'm curious, Shagun, so how long have you been studying this particular topic?
So I have so my project started with my PhD back in 2015, where I started out with this idea of trying to understand online harms, interpersonal harms like online harassment. And in the process of studying online harassment, my work naturally kind of like shifted towards how do we go about addressing online harassment.
Right.
And from there, I started getting into this idea of looking at platform governance and content moderation and
Interesting.
how do platforms go about trying to address these challenges.
Yeah, so this type of research has never existed before, right? I mean, this is really because there was no there was no online platform at scale.
So I mean, there is a strong body of research that has already kind of like been looking at this
Mhm.
platform governance arrangements, but there's still much less research than you would expect,
Mhm.
and there are lots of open questions within this space of like how do we go about.
So what surprised you and or continues to surprise you about your work and experience in this space?
So one thing that surprises me is how much of it is uh, how much can I draw from other disciplines like social psychology and economics and all of those disciplines. How can they really directly inform the way that platforms are governed? And one really interesting thing about these online platforms is you can track everything. So there is this really wonderful opportunity to really understand the direct effects of different design choices or policy choices. And that actually can, right now, for example, in this research, I drew from political science theories to inform online governance, but it can be a reverse direction where we do experiments, much more controlled or controllable experiments in the online governance space, and they can, in fact, shape the way that we go about governing our offline communities. So the line between online and offline is starting to blur a lot, and that's interesting.
That is really interesting. Until this presentation, I really, and was one of the very first master's level social media classes ever taught was at Sky in 2009. I just didn't realize how different Twitter/X. Will we ever stop calling it Twitter/X or just call it X? I don't know. Um, I didn't realize how different and now it was from the other platforms from this governance perspective and just how important that really is, especially now, um, given the Wild West nature. I'm never calling it, Owen is never calling it X. Okay, I'm kind of with you there, just because I think it might irritate Elon Musk at some level. Um, Shago, you call it X at any point in time?
I'm so at least in my current manuscripts, I'm calling it Twitter because just X just makes it like it just sounds a bit weird to my ear, and also like, but I do have it in parenthesis that now it's
That's
called
whatever, yeah.
now X,
Mhm.
just to kind of like clarify. Yeah.
So, Victoria says, if you know, how often are the middle level mods compensated and how does that change the middle level relationship with higher level admins? So do the moderators get compensated?
So that's a very good question.
Great
And
question.
this question comes up quite often. In fact, one of my colleagues did a study which looked at what would be the financial um, uh, contribution of all of these different thousands of Reddit moderators toiling every hour on Reddit and making sure that these communities are functioning
Yeah, because
appropriately.
it's just
Uh,
labor, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's
it
free
is
labor.
definitely absolutely, and the cost like they actually put a number on this, and it ran into millions of dollars. So the governance labor question is really important. Uh, and also, researchers have done studies into what really incentivizes people to contribute.
Mhm.
And does the nature of contribution change when we motivate them through extrinsic means like financial um,
Mhm.
offers compared to just intrinsic motivation, such as like belonging to the community or just an emotional investment into the appropriate functioning of that community.
Well, is it so again, when I was a moderator, I didn't really like it, but moderators of, I guess large groups, et cetera, they must get some sort of social boost or feeling emotional satisfaction from that. That must be the compensation.
Yeah, there is a compensation for a lot of them. A lot of times, these volunteer moderators, the types that exist on Facebook and Reddit, they are often selected from the people who are the most active members of their community and who
Right.
already have a good understanding of what are the norms of this community, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. Um, and some cynical users would say that the moderators are the people who need like a power trip. So that's another that's another like a psychological aspect of is that like a motivation that drives people to try to contribute to these communities?
I
Yeah.
would say probably yes. So Heather, would you like to take yourself off mute and ask your question? It's a good one. Or I can ask it for you.
I could do that. So one of the things that kind of stood out for me, because this is something that I could kind of relate to, is that you also referenced World of Warcraft in with social media. And I know that's something me and some of my friends are dealing with in a different game platform is, the way that people tend to behave, and we're having, problems trying to actually govern it ourselves. So I first wondered if it was similar enough to social media that the same principles really can be applied, or was it more difficult to kind of correlate that with what you found, or recommend for social media platforms?
Yeah. So the the idea behind including this like range of different platforms, including World of Warcraft, which you're right, these are not essentially social media platforms, but I would call it like a digital platforms. But it's very much a social platform. That's why it's under this category of online social platforms. Was Our focus was on the governance structure and how the structure itself is created in terms of like what is the top level here, what is the middle level, what is the bottom level, how are those governance arrangements created, both in terms of the code, the architecture, as well as the um, norms and policies. So because that was our focus, World of Warcraft was very much kind of like within the space of platforms that we wanted to consider because it has its own unique aspects. And also, one of the ideas of looking at different types of platforms was to kind of like create the like identify the possibilities that exist. So I did not have time to go into the details of this, but some of the things that we found was some of the design ideas are actually very much underexplored so far. So this, by creating this design space, we are also opening up opportunities for future platforms to create new types of websites and new types of governance arrangements. So that was kind of like the uh, reasoning behind including that.
Great.
I thought that was really fascinating. And I actually had, I didn't see anyone else put a question, so I just wanted to add on another question is, kind of like what I was saying before, where my friends and I are having kind of an issue with there's actually lack of governance in a similar gaming platform. Have you found any examples where the accountability for governance is actually driven by the users themselves, rather kind of coming from the top down, especially on global platforms?
Especially on what platforms?
Especially when the platform is very global. So there's
On
no,
global.
Yeah,
yeah, because there's different like
yeah.
laws and everything like that, that some people think it's just they could do as they please.
Yeah. So are you saying that are there examples where the demand for governance comes from users rather than from the top down?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's very much the case in many cases. So a lot of the Silicon Valley rhetoric, at least, well, it's changing now, but at least up until 5 years ago, a lot of it was like very libertarian and very laissez-faire that, oh yeah, we let the users determine what they want to do. We want to provide as much free speech and as much freedom of expression as possible to the end users. And they wanted to minimize censorship. Um, and then we found that a lot of online harms are occurring on these websites, like misinformation and hate speech and so on. So some content moderation was important. But in a lot of cases, especially in decentralized architectures, the way that the community is governed is very much shaped by what the users want, which is one of the attractions of decentralized governance. For example, if you have like a small Facebook group or a small WhatsApp group, the users of that group can really shape the way that the group is governed as a whole, and what kinds of conversations are acceptable and what kinds of conversations are not acceptable. And especially in the space of global platforms, it's becoming more and more important because uh, cultural norms vary very widely across different communities, across different countries. So just having this single centralized platform like Twitter, which is governed by the same set of rules, which are really influenced by the cultural norms of Silicon Valley, can like we can't really expect that single set of norms to work well for everybody across the world. So that's why I can like this user driven and user shaped governance practices is really critical and now accepted more and more.
Interesting. So I have one last question for me, and then we can, one last question from the audience. So like with Facebook groups, etc., they're not monetized by Facebook per se, right? I mean, just so how do Facebook's groups actually work in their business model? And does that have an impact on their content moderation policies?
Don't quote me on that, but I think Facebook groups also have ads. So it's the same
Do they?
model that they have. Yeah, I think I might be wrong on this, but as far as I know, Facebook groups also have the same uh,
So
like
the Facebook group could actually do an ad. Okay, interesting.
yeah, yeah.
All right, let's see if we have any other questions. Anybody else have a question from the audience? I think we're pretty, oh wait, we do. Is that Eric, please take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask your question. Or I can ask it for you. Okay, I'll ask it for you. Eric asks, the Communications Decency Act gives immunity to platforms from the liabilities of content posted by users, while at the Digital Millennium Copyright Act compels platforms to remove hosted content if there is a DCMA complaint filed against it. How much does centralization or decentralizing platform power impact how platforms interact?
Okay, great question. So there is, as you correctly mentioned here, the Communication Decency Act. There's a section 230 of that act, which gives platforms the immunity to moderate however they prefer. And if they choose to moderate in a certain way, they don't get themselves liable for insufficient or inadequate moderation. There are some exceptions to this. So, for example, one of the exceptions you already mentioned, the copyright violations. So platforms have to make sure that those are taken care of. Nobody is posting content which violates copyright. There are laws against child pornography, and platforms have to make sure that that type of content is not posted online. And the way that it works in practice is by this overlap of responsibility, which I talked about. So
Mhm.
platforms have this automated arrangements, governance arrangements in place. So they have this huge um, directories or dictionaries of copyright content, which they match against every new posted content. So for every new post, they check with this dictionary that they have, does it match any of the copyrighted content? And a lot of the copyrighted content gets taken down through those checks, through those automated arrangements. So platforms don't have to do anything. They don't have to make new investments for that. So every big platform has this already available platform level infrastructures, which takes a first pass at each posted material on the site. Um, Another way that these infractions get taken care of is by reporting practices. So end users can also report content which violates the platform's terms and services. And that's another way that this content gets flagged to the platform and they remove it. So it's kind of like a mix and match, but it's not perfect.
And I assume AI is taking over. AI and algorithmic governance is already well established.
Yeah, one of my main articles within this space was to look at how human moderators go about interacting with AI-based moderation tools to enact these governance arrangements. And I found that yes, they ease the work of moderators by taking care of some inappropriate content by themselves, but they also complicate the work of moderators in many ways because these tools often make mistakes. They cannot really
Mm.
make sense of the context in which the
Yeah.
post is made. Yeah,
Humor, satire,
yeah,
irony,
yep,
still sarcasm, all still very tough for
yep.
AI. Well, we are a little bit over, so I want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule, research schedule, for sharing your wisdom and your really fascinating. I mean, it's again, this is groundbreaking because we've never had these problems before. So I'm glad you're tackling those. So let me quickly just wrap up here a little bit.
Yeah, I also wanted to kind of like give a shout out that if anyone is interested in this kind of research and just want to chat, I'm happy to chat with you and tell you more about some of the projects going on in our lab right now.
Yeah, and again, you're part of two of the two labs and the cluster as well. So, you know, a lot of people and a lot of really interesting work. So, graduate students, that's what you should be doing. So again, a video of this will be up on the MI Colloquium in about a week or so. So check on that. Our next colloquium, remember when Shagun said, you know, WhatsApp is a problem because it's encrypted? Well, we're going to actually tackle that next colloquium, which is on March 21st with Professor Kieran Garamila. So I hope you guys will join us for that. And with that, I will bid you all good night. Thank you for joining us on Leap Day. And I'll stick around for a little bit. Maybe Shagun will stick around for a little bit if anybody wants some other questions. If not, good night. Thank you so much. I'll look forward to reading your reflections on this one. This is going to be very interesting. So take care, everybody. All right. You can go ahead and stop the recording if you'd like. Maybe I can.